Saturday at Swiss Days in Midway, Utah, my husband and I sat down at a picnic table, grateful for a little shade. A grandmother and her granddaughter joined us. The child, dressed in her Swiss-made costume, carried a plate piled high with vanilla ice cream. She smiled at me with that stubborn sparkle children have and declared she could eat the whole thing. And she did, every last bite. It should have ended there, a shared moment of delight, a small festival memory. But in Utah, it rarely does. The grandmother leaned forward, eager to clarify who exactly I was sitting with. This wasn't just a granddaughter. This was the sister of the Swiss maid for 2025. The family, she explained, owned a large dairy farm. They sold cows to Ballerina Farms. They knew what real ice cream was because they produced it themselves. She reminisced about drinking raw milk as a child. She warned us against the whipped cream on the pies sold at the booth because it wasn't real cream. Before I could breathe, the older woman sitting beside me chimed in, "Oh yes, I have a friend who's very famous for baking pies, and she insists on real cream too." And there it was, the familiar Utah script. What starts as a simple conversation turns into a genealogy of validation, a litany of who you're connected to, who you know, what name you can drop. It's a ritual of hierarchy, proximity to fame, to power, to Mormon royalty. This obsession with lineage is not new here. In Utah, worth has long been measured by your last name, your ancestors, the ward you come from. Descendants of pioneer leaders are treated like nobility. Families tied to church authorities wield unspoken privilege. In small towns, even a Swiss-made crown becomes a symbol of generational prestige. And when that religious aristocracy bleeds into the broader culture, it shapes everything, from who gets noticed, to who gets promoted, to who feels invisible. It isn't just about the ice cream. It isn't about the whipped cream. It's about power. It's about the constant need to prove one's place in the invisible pecking order. The tragedy is that it squeezes out genuine connection. Instead of talking about the joy of a little girl finishing her mountain of ice cream, we trade credentials. Instead of being curious about each other, we posture. And what does that say to those who don't have the right name, the right connections, the right story to tell? That they are less, that they are forgettable, that they are at least tolerated, but never fully belonging. By the time I stood up to leave, I realized how tired I was, not just from the crowd, but from the endless hum of validation by association. In Utah, it can feel as if no one is simply enough on their own. Everyone must be linked, tethered, endorsed. The hierarchy is everywhere, at church, at work, even in line for pie. And that is the cruelest part. In a place where community should bring belonging, hierarchy ensures that belonging is always conditional. It is why so many here feel invisible, even while surrounded by people. Because when conversations are built on claims of connection rather than curiosity, no one is truly seen. What Utah really needs is a piece of humble pie, made not with real cream, but with apologies, genuine curiosity, and respect that isn't earned through pedigree. Only then will belonging stop being a privilege for the connected and start becoming a birthright for everyone. Join me today on She Became Visible as my guest Peter Bleakley and I discuss the new documentary entitled Inconvenient Faith. Peter will introduce himself, giving you more opportunity to listen to his beautiful accent. He's not American. He is a Brit. And I'll tell you, my stepfather was from England, but he had been in America since the 50s. And so he had lost a lot of his accent. The only time you could really hear it is when he gave a talk in church, and then it would come out. We went to England a few times to visit his sisters that lived there. And I've learned just from the amount of BBC that I watch that you could be the most uneducated Cockney, industrial worker, blue collar, and you still sound so much more intelligent than Americans do. And I'm going to prove that point by bringing Peter on. So come on.
What, geez? How you doing?
Doing so well. I am so excited to be talking to you. I have listened to you from the very beginning when I first started my deconstruction, and I listened to your podcast called the Mormon Civil Wars.
Mormon Civil War. It was kind of choosing sides and how to fight for them in the Mormon Civil War.
It
Is
was
the
so
kind of the
good.
catchphrase.
Yeah, and it
Thank
was,
you. That's
how
really
long did
kind.
you do that?
So I'm still doing it, because I have like a full-time job as an art teacher and very
Yeah.
little spare time. Sometimes there's a gap of months between each episode, but I'm always working on the next ones. So it kind of began, I'm terrible with dates, but I think around 2020, 2021, some of my
Yeah.
long Facebook posts evolved into audio and then into video. Anyone can do it, the wonder of social media and
Yeah.
getting the tech for it, you can do it. And if you're speaking something that's helpful to people, it will resonate and you will
Yeah.
have an audience. And yeah,
Yeah.
so it's been a real journey, but really fun, very interesting. I never thought I'd end up doing this.
Yeah. Well, but what I think is amazing was you were at the time a full attending, believing Mormon. And so
Yes.
your goal, like so many others that have been excommunicated from the church, was to
Mm,
simply bring to light the differences and the problems with some of
mm,
our history and
yeah.
the kind of the fudging of history. And you were just trying to figure that out in your own mind. Was
Mm,
there something that you really like? What was your first,
mm.
like, wait, I got to look this up. I have to figure this out moment?
I think it's been a journey, to sort of name drop my genealogy of validation. My great grandmother was the first in the family to join the church, and she was converted by hearing James Talmage. And she weirdly was doing the British Empire thing and living in Ceylon, which is now Sri Lanka. And she corresponded with John A. Widsoe, and his wife particularly was very supportive of her, because she was the only Mormon in this whole country. From the beginning, it was the more intellectual side of the general authorities were engaging with my family, and I
Mm,
think that set up a legacy. So I grew up in with parents very faithful, very, very, always serving in senior callings and very involved, but also able to do critical analysis, have sometimes quite heated arguments on a Sunday in between church. And just the kind of the worldview was, we love this church, we're serving in it, we want it to do well, we're doing our bit, but we also take responsibility for how it is. And
mm.
we can do better. My parents actually were both Brits, but they met at Brigham Young University, got married there, had me as the anchor baby, And so I'm a birthright citizen of the USA as
Woohoo!
well as Britain, but only lived there during my mission. Since they, in a sense, had come to America in the 1960s and 70s, seen what the church can be, then gone back to Britain, where it was very amateur hour.
Yeah.
We were really rebuilding the church from scratch in the 20th century. They were in kind of the same struggle that Joseph Smith describes, of kind of having this vision of how things could be, but it's really hard to get it in people's heads and all of that. Very much, I was used to the idea that the church is us. We are responsible for making this thing work. And also the challenges of a completely different environment to Utah, of being out in a much more secular society in Britain, being Mormons, a weird, misunderstood, ostracized, kind of hated, very bizarre minority cult. And that is an entirely different game plan and paradigm to what people in Utah and Idaho and wherever are used to. I'd always been raised thoughtful and intellectual about the gospel, but particularly with a passion that it has to do what it says on the tin. It must have integrity. Jeff Strong has been doing some amazing research and surveys of people across the Mormon spectrum, and he started appearing on some of the podcasts like Leading Saints and others, describing the findings from thousands of people who've responded to his surveys. And he's going to be releasing more and more of that information. So I definitely recommend checking that out. But what he says is, in a sense, in the church, there are lots of different tribes. You have defenders of the faith, sort of 20% or so of the active membership are what we kind of call TBMs, the true believing Mormons, who are just
Mhm.
all in, very much, but also quite defensive about the church, very controlling, authoritarian. The church is what I would call kind of a Pharisee version of Mormonism, where
Yeah.
it's all about the rules and the regulations. Although they're only 20% of the active membership, they're 90 or more percent of the leadership from bishop level upwards.
Yes. Yes.
And that creates the tension with the other groups who are people who are more motivated by the church has to be good, not just to be right. Their thing is the
Right.
church must be right, the doctrines must be correct, but it must have integrity. So if it's claiming to be God's church on earth, but is hoarding money and taking it from the poor and lying to people, that's a deal breaker for the people who care about the integrity, and it must be good. And you have other groups who are much more just about community. So they're not so bothered about these issues. They don't want to be controversial. They just love being with the people.
Yep.
And they're the people, he says, who will step up to be workers in the temple and run the youth camps and things like that. What I love about that and what I'm exploring and what I've experienced is there is this civil war in the church, but I simplify it into Christians versus Pharisees.
Yeah.
And the reason I'm still active in church, I'm still there most Sundays and present, even though I've been next for being too critical of the leaders. The Christians need to hang around, some of us at least, if we can, to kind of be a voice for that, as much as you're able to be. But the reason I don't just leave the Mormon paradigm is it's there in Mormonism and it's articulated so beautifully. Not only do you have the Gospels where Jesus is in intense war with the Pharisees, with the controlling, corrupted leaders of his church, the religious authorities, and he's quite feisty in his arguments with them and what he says about them and the warning he gives of what they've done to his religion, which is absolutely playing out in every religion, in every organization. You have the idealists and the kind of authoritarian control freaks who go stale with and get corrupted by money and power. That just plays out. But also in Mormonism, our foundational myth, as it were, is not the Garden of Eden with the weird story with the lady eating the apple from the snake. It begins long before then with the war in heaven, which is framed as a democratic debate around totalitarian control or freedom and democracy and choice. Wow. So that I
Yeah.
grew up with that is my religion. That's the foundational concept of
Right.
what Mormonism is. So when you then find that the church's leaders have become the baddies that you read about in the Gospels,
Yeah.
and you start hearing they've been lying to us about so many things. They're hoarding the money that they're taking from the poor. And I was a ward clerk for years, shoveling incredibly generous donations from old age pensioners who really couldn't afford
Yeah.
it to various funds like the Perpetual Education Fund and Humanitarian Aid. And then we found out in Britain, because the church has to make financial declarations to our charity
Yes.
and
Yes.
publish them,
Yeah.
none of it was being spent on what they said it was. It's just all
Right.
being held in a bank account for a decade, and earning interest. And then they just, a couple of years ago, they just sent it all to Salt Lake. So we have no idea what that money ever actually got spent on. That's charity fraud. So for me, the car crash has been an ethical one, finding out that the church wasn't being honest, was not
Right.
living up to its claims and all of that. And then you start to learn and you explore. There's a whole world of information in social media now, which has been an incredible revolution. I've kind of
Yeah.
had this experience of being a defender of the faith before the internet, and then the
Yeah.
more I got informed by what's out there in social media, a bit becoming a sort of insider critic, as it were. So I think that's been my journey, really. And there are lots of steps along the way. Just constant disappointment. I think just one microcosm was when Elder Ballard gave his address to the church education system, I think around 2015. I can't remember the date exactly. And it was this amazing breath of fresh air. It's like, we've got the gospel topics now, and you need to teach it to the kids. They
Yes.
need to hear the difficult
Yes.
stuff here
You
at
can't
church.
just say it's about your
No,
feelings
don't,
anymore.
yes,
Yeah.
don't fob them off with bearing your testimony and faith
Yeah.
promoting rumors.
Yeah.
Answer their questions.
Yeah.
Be the source of information. It was incredible. I was like, oh my, I never thought I'd hear this from an
Yeah.
apostle
Yeah.
to the whole church system.
Right.
Do it. Know the gospel topics like the back of your hands. When they printed that talk in December 2016-ish or something like that, they removed the back of your hand phrase. It was so weird. It's like they had the whole of this very long talk in the ensign,
Yeah.
but they just said know it well. And they'd removed that one phrase, know it like the back of your hands. And that was like a tiny thing, but it rang alarm bells. It's like the backlash has begun.
Yeah.
Why are they uncomfortable with actually knowing the gospel topics essays like the back of your
Yes.
hands?
Yeah.
And then about a year later, he and Dalian Oakes did one of the first of these face-to-face broadcasts with the
Yes.
youth
Yes.
answering
That's
their
my
questions,
favorite.
which again, I was like so excited. You know, they're actually engaging with the youth instead of hiding
Yes.
behind apologists doing their
Yeah.
dirty work for them. And he didn't do anything he told the whole CES system to do. I was horrified. I actually played this to my poor parents. And I kept stopping the film every 10 seconds, kind of have a
Yeah.
rant. And they were like, Peter, just let us finish listening to it. I was having a complete meltdown in the living
Yeah.
room.
Yeah.
I was so angry because the hypocritical bastard, he'd
Yeah.
told everyone to do this, but when it's his turn to model it, he lied to them.
Yeah.
He made wild, sweeping generalizations. He told them to trust their feelings and just trust us. I know that from the beginning of time, the leaders of the, I'm like, you don't know the church leaders from the beginning of time. From the beginning of time, they've always acted with integrity. They've never hidden
Yeah.
anything from anyone. And
Yes.
in it, they produced the hidden 1832 account of the first vision, which is Exhibit A for people talking about the church hiding its history, as if
Okay.
this was proof that they hadn't. And you
Yeah.
just think they don't know what they're talking about. Someone's handed them this before and given them like a 5-minute summary of how to spin it. They have no idea what bombshells they're letting off with this thing. And it just, that for me, I think was kind of a final straw, along with the November policy of exclusion, which
Yeah. Yeah.
literally contradicted Jesus saying, "Suffer the children to come unto me," and
Yeah.
broke several of the articles of faith about not punishing people for what their parents do.
Yeah.
And you just think, what do you even do
What's
with these
happening?
people?
Yeah.
It's just the whole
I'm gonna
thing has
have
collapsed.
yeah, I'm gonna have my
Yeah,
editor put
go
that
on.
in. I'm gonna have my editor slip that in because I should have,
Yeah,
that thing where it's, we have never hidden anything, and as apostles
yeah,
of God, we
yeah,
travel the world and we know
yes,
nothing
we
about this.
know it.
Yeah, I'm gonna have him put that in there because
Yeah,
that was
yeah.
and you know what? Going back to this new documentary that's out there, this
Mm,
Inconvenient Faith, that's
mm,
exactly what some of the people that are now taking each episode and kind of separating it and trying to explain
mm,
why it's good in so many ways, but
mm,
still failing in other ways. Exactly what you're talking about, Peter. On one hand, they're talking about the nuanced Mormons, the progressive Mormons, and how
mm,
they're allowing people to have these thoughts. But I've heard so many
mm,
people say that, unless it comes from the 15, unless you hear it over the pulpit in
mm,
Salt Lake, come from the top, people are not going to accept it. So when you have
yeah,
a Faith Matters conference or the Restore conference,
mm,
or
mm,
you have Maxine Hanks and you have Jim Bennett and when
yeah,
you have all of them
mm,
going, yeah, polygamy was probably bad. It was probably a sin. It probably wasn't, but we're all just human. We just all make mistakes. I'm like, you know what? I
and
have
Mormons
never
don't believe our prophets are infallible. What?
exactly.
Have you
I
met
know.
them?
Exactly. I know. And it's like, I've made mistakes. My son and I talk about the mistakes. We forced him to go to
Yeah,
BYU. He didn't want to go. He had a career path set up at Oregon State, and we thought we were
yeah,
doing the right thing. That's a mistake that we made.
mm, mm,
I didn't tell him to go take 40 wives, hide them in a basement, and not tell, and then lie about it.
yeah.
Those are two completely different things.
It's so bizarre, and it is this shock of, and I think our generation particularly
Yeah.
has, I mean, you're about 20, aren't you? I'm a bit older.
Yeah,
Um,
mhm, yeah,
it's
that's
has got
it.
it's odd because you almost feel like you are a witness of history because
Yeah,
people have forgotten what it used to be like.
yeah.
You know,
Well, when
there
you
was
talk about your
all of
parents
those
coming
people
yeah,
would have been excommunicated immediately 30 years ago.
yeah,
And they're presenting this as the real church. It's
yeah.
nonsense. It's the nuanced one
And
they've
you've
made up
got
in
the
their head.
you've got the
Yeah,
topic essays. They're starting to
yeah,
have to talk about them. Before they hid them where you couldn't find them.
yeah.
Now they have to talk about them. In fact, now they've come out with more and they're talking about them.
Mm,
But then you still have Peter Bleakley's getting excommunicated because you
mm,
still can't really say anything critical about what's
No.
going on.
Yeah.
So that's a fallacy. Let me show a little clip
Mm.
from
But,
the
you know, if you look at the 70s and 80s, and those were people that I looked up to, but then I had these foundations from being, raised by faithful parents, and I had to start making some decisions pretty quick, and I didn't always make the right decisions.
Other people are wrestling with the rules and why we have them. Especially the younger generations growing up are not growing up in a place where they just take the rules and say, oh, okay, I'm just going to do it. I'm just going to obey because for obedience sake. The younger generations really want to feel like their lives have meaning, that they're expressing their Christianity in a way that is authentic, that is doing actual good in the world. They no longer want to sit in the pews and pat themselves on the back, that they have some sort of truth. I can't help but see the irony of so much of the New Testament talking about Jesus and the Pharisees and trying to explain
exactly
to
what you
them
talked about.
why all of their rules were problematic and showing them how to skillfully, he wasn't flaunting the rules, but he was skillfully breaking them. Oh, you have a purity code? Watch me touch this dead body. When there was purpose in it, he took the higher spirit of the law. He taught us that. I feel like that's something we miss sometimes in the way that we enforce the rules that we have. It's something we haven't questioned ourselves on enough.
And that's exactly what you were talking about, Peter. And when you were talking
Yeah.
about your parents, being in the States in
Mm.
the 60s and the 70s, well, in the
Mm.
60s with David O. McKay, the church was growing and they had this fabulous program set up where it was so much about community.
Mm.
And we didn't
Mm.
even, I grew up, I think my parents joined the church in 62. So I grew up with the road shows and the
Mm.
Relief Society bazaars that earned money for themselves. And that was the church that I knew. I didn't know anything about
Mm.
anything before David O. McKay. I was 12.
Mm.
But and so like I said, my generation, we definitely just accepted the truth for what it was. We believed it to be true. We didn't question anything. And we weren't really biblical scholars because we weren't encouraged to read the Bible. We were told that the Book of Mormon was the only true living scriptures and that the Bible's cute, it's nice, and Jesus, we like him, he's a great guy. But Nephi, I mean, this is where
Mm.
that's how I grew up. And so now,
Yeah.
you say the church is turning to Jesus is everything. I'm like, well, I know, and we all believed in Jesus, but it was Nephi that brought the Jesus, appeared to the Nephites in America. And let's tell that story because that's way better than what
Mm.
was going on in Jerusalem.
Mm.
That's what I grew up with. And then, like you say, to have these rules that we just obeyed. And now you've got them saying, oh, you know what? Those shoulders, they're good. When it was never about modesty, right? You were excommunicated. What year were you
Mm.
excommunicated?
I think it was 2021. I always get this wrong.
Oh,
Around then, yes.
okay. So you
So
were to
just
the
after COVID, coming out of COVID. Yeah.
okay. So you were at going to
Mm.
the temple when they made the change in 2019. You saw that
Yes.
change.
So I was quite lucky that I went on, I became 18, went through the temple and went on my mission in 1989. So I actually caught the old one with the penalties and
Oh,
the full masonry and slitting your throat and cutting your hearts out and your bowels spilling on the
the good
ground.
old days. Yeah.
Yeah, so so they made the changes, the first wave of changes by President Hinckley during my mission, which we were very grateful for because my granny was finally going to join the church, but everyone had been paranoid about her having to experience that endowment.
Oh,
So we were in the family, everyone else in the family had been Mormon all their lives, but my granny was kind of a holdout. So in old age, she finally joined and went to the temple. And everyone in the family was just breathing this huge sigh of relief that she wasn't going to have to pantomime cutting her throat. It's like, how dare you do that to our little granny?
oh my
Which
gosh.
said a lot of why did you do that to me as a child?
Yeah.
Practically, why did you do
Yeah.
that to anyone? I think it is a challenge. President Nelson has taken a flamethrower to the culture of the church. He doesn't
Yes.
understand it at all. The art, you have to have the stereotypical white European Jesus foyer art from his list of approved
Yes.
artworks. I mean,
Yeah.
it's totalitarian as he's shut down the pageants at the same time as funding huge birthday party pageants for him. I mean, you
Yes.
can't make this stuff up. The
Yeah.
hypocrisy is off the scale.
Yeah.
And I was in one of my last callings was in the stake activities committee, and we had
Ah,
this amazing plan to launch kind of a whole new vision for doing activities, that rather than everyone being forced to come to the one thing that no one really wants to be at, we're going to have people run lots of different kinds of activities. You just come along if you want to. If you like classical music, we'll go to a concert. If you like sports, you can do the sports thing. This is what we're offering. And at that point, they released us all because President Nelson thinks less is more. And so suddenly the ward councils or the bishop was going to organize all the activities. So the social life of the church died an immediate death at that point. And
yeah.
it's far too much to put on them. They're already overburdened. It was madness.
You know, what's funny
So
about that is he's
yeah,
probably being the egomaniac
mm,
doctor, God, God complex that many
yeah,
doctors have.
yeah,
And the fact that
mm,
his particular profession really took him into solitude where it was all
mm,
about him and maybe a couple. So this
yeah.
whole community activities thing is probably something he was never comfortable with,
No,
never even partook of
they've
because
got
he was,
no
busy,
social skills.
no
Yeah,
social
yeah,
skills whatsoever. And
mm,
so in his mind, it's like, we're going to cut the church down
mm,
to 2 hours, just go home.
mm.
I don't even want to be there. And I'm not doing this linger longer thing that you guys are doing. And
Yeah,
that's uncomfortable for him. Therefore, it
mm.
must be uncomfortable for everyone. And now I am the supreme leader. So I will cut
And
it
it's the
out.
narcissism, yeah. And Darren
Yes.
Oates is the same. I mean,
Y-
I was a special needs coordinator in my school for a long
Oh,
time, and so there's a lot of Asperger's in my family, so it's kind of an amateur hobby to diagnose everyone.
yeah.
Like
Yes.
clearly autistic, Darren Oates. I mean, off
Yeah.
the scale, all the classic symptoms, and that's something that in all patriarchal societies, I think, is something that people should be more aware of. And there's a lot, something I really should explore in an episode sometime is
Yeah.
because this protector type of personality, the Pharisee, the rules person, absolutely extreme maleness, autistic thinking, it perfectly suits. Therefore, I do think we have a disproportionate number of people in leadership who are on the
Yeah.
spectrum clearly, and imposing that on everyone else, and they just don't get it. They lack empathy, at least to some degree, that they can ruin people's lives and think they're doing the work of God, and they don't get it. They just can't see the
Yeah.
harm that they're doing, and the church exaggerates those things in how it does control and hierarchy and power. And certainly you can clock in the first presidency where
Yeah, I never
yeah,
put those 2 together, but as you're
mm,
saying that, I thought, "Oh, that's
mm,
exactly when they get hooked into these are the
mm,
rules, there are no exceptions to the
mm,
rules, and then no
mm,
empathy."
yeah,
And that goes
yeah,
right back into I remember I was out of town, so I was trying to catch up on conference over the weekend in April, back in, I
mm,
think it was 20, we were still wearing masks, so it must have been like 21 or 22.
mm,
And listening to Nelson give his talk about the myopathy and how his
mm.
granddaughter was myopic because she couldn't see the whole picture. And what are you grieving about your dead father for? I mean, get over it. You don't see the whole deal. Yeah. And I remember going, what? That's exactly what you're talking about. It's like, well,
Yeah.
these are the rules. This is the plan of
Yeah.
salvation. You should understand that. Move
You
on.
shouldn't have emotions. I mean, and
Yes.
his fake movie about the alleged fiery plane crash thing. Again, he's boasting
Yeah.
about not being worried, not being
Yes.
concerned.
Yes.
And Henry Eyring did an exactly similar talk years ago,
I
talking about
remember that.
the Grand Teton Dam.
Yes. Yes.
So his children could have just been drowned and they don't know because this is before mobile phones. And he's having a lovely night's sleep and he's kind of criticizing his wife about not being able to sleep because she's worried her children might have died.
Yeah.
And this smug, self-congratulatory, oh, but I wasn't worried because we're an eternal family, where that
Yeah.
sort of logical framework overrides normal
Yeah.
humanity and
So well, we'll
emotional
see him in the
reactions.
next life. Why? Means they're dead. Whatever. We'll see him again.
And that's the ideal, and Oates is clearly autistic as well. It's all
Yeah.
three of them. I mean,
Yeah.
bloody hell, to be very British. And these are the people running the church, and we're meant to
Yeah.
make our lives in their image, and they're in
Yeah.
charge of everything. But also they lie. There
Yeah.
is some autistic pupils I know can't lie. These guys have worked out ways to rationalize it clearly.
Yeah.
That is the mindset of what Jeff Strong kind of calls, or one of the aspects of these defenders. He's not slating them entirely, and people can be a mixture of things. But the problem we got in the church is those people are mostly in charge,
Yeah.
and they love it, and they think everyone should become like them to be
Yeah.
righteous, rather
Yeah.
than they need to learn to cope with diversity. And that's Jeff's
Yeah.
main message, is that one group of only 20% of the membership are chasing everyone else away. And they need to remind themselves of Paul's analogy of the body of Christ, involving people who are entirely different to you, but still essential, even though they don't look it in your worlds. They can't all be the head. And I think it's that basic, fundamental, epic failure to understand all the warnings about this in our scriptures, and to see Mormons, of all
Yeah.
people, where we've got all these extra scriptures warning against doing this, all the way from literally a real specific definition of Satanism being forcing everyone to just do good rather
Yes.
than become
Yes.
good, choose to be
Yes.
good, evolve as a person, become like God, self-actualize, be creative. And they don't see it, even though
Yeah.
they could recite those scriptures. I think so. For me, if I was going to kind of put in a nutshell, that's what's blown my head up over these years
Yeah.
of absorbing, being taught in seminary scriptures, that religion, that of course you don't behave like the Pharisees, and then seeing the church relentlessly. Some of those streams were already there, but you do get different factions amongst the apostles, and sometimes the authoritarians come to the fore, and we're certainly in that situation at the moment. And we know there's this cluster of much more open-minded and liberal, or whatever term you want to give it, apostles, just waiting for these people to die, and they absolutely won't die.
Yeah.
I mean, they must be going nuts, because they're like make it to their hundreds now, and they can't get
So
rid
true.
of them, and
I
they
know.
know it's past time for the next generation to do
Yeah.
something better.
Yeah.
But also, I step back along with Nemo the Mormon, the other British
Yeah.
podcasters, and are
Yeah.
like, why are we even in this system? Why are you so desperate to have an aristocracy
Yeah.
where everything depends on the dictator king and his whims, and you have to wait for him to die and replaced by someone more liberal before any change can happen? We
Yeah.
should be voting opposed to them. Let's just get rid of them now and save
Yeah.
our church.
Yeah.
Vote opposed. And it's all there. The Doctrine and Covenants allows you to do that. But they have really worked hard to downplay those scriptures, and to
Yeah.
completely flip the script from empower. My sense of things when I was younger was we were constantly told about accountability. Accountability. I don't know if it was the same for you, but accountability was a major buzzword. And the concept always is that if you have a calling or you're a leader, you are accountable to the people and to God. And we vote. The sustaining vote is checking on the leaders,
Yeah.
and they flipped that script. So another trigger points for me in General Conference was when they had one of the 70 presidents, whose name escapes me, and other people flip that script to, your sustaining vote is a lifelong commitment to loyalty
Yeah.
to that leader, regardless of what they do. Only God can punish them. And
Yeah.
particularly Henry B. Eyring in his Power of Sustaining Faith talk in 2019-ish, where he said it's literally a sin you should repent of before every sustaining vote, before every temple recommend interview, that if you speak or even think of any church leaders at any level having human weakness, that's a sin.
Between that
Yeah,
and Oakes saying you must never
yeah,
criticize, and I've used the word
yeah.
authoritarianism in the
Mm,
church, and a fascist, the church is really a fascist organization, and we're just the
mm,
feudal slaves that are meant to go
yeah,
collect the things and then give all our riches to the royal family. I'm glad to hear you say that. Maybe someone that's lived through that kind of monarchy is the only one that
yeah.
can recognize that, where those of us,
Well,
we haven't
it's
lived through it.
as Brits looking at America, it always tickles us how desperate Americans are to create new royal aristocracies. The
Yes.
Kennedys, the
Yes.
Roosevelts, and now the Trumps.
Yeah.
It's like, I thought you're meant to be all about getting rid of a monarchy, but you can see the allure. There's something in people's brains that love a royal family. And even when their whole constitution is meant to about getting rid of all of that and never repeating it, they just keep wanting to do it,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
if it's not them, it will be celebrities,
yeah,
Hollywood
exactly.
royalty. It's so fascinating. But of course I approve. I mean, brilliant. Welcome on board.
Yeah,
You were talking in your lovely preamble
yeah,
about being constantly conscious of name dropping your aristocratic ancestors in
yeah,
Utah culture, and belonging is always conditional. It's well, of course, well done, marvelous.
yeah, yeah,
The British way, class
yeah,
system.
yeah,
Absolutely. The weird thing we do here is we still in a sense have the trappings of all of that, and we are a very class conscious
yeah,
society still to some extent, and
yeah,
you have a different culture and a different accent even depending on your class,
right.
in a way that Americans do not get close to in most cases.
Yeah,
And that will be different in each region. You travel 15 miles here and all the accents change, but there's still a class difference,
yeah,
and within those regional accents. So we are conscious of that, but through an intense dose of democratic revolution, having some of the first of them in the world, and creating a stable functioning democracy without bloody revolution, at least not since the Civil War in the 1600s, we have the trappings of royalty and a royal family, but they have to play a completely different game. If they were in any way anything other than grateful and humble, we would chop their heads off.
interesting.
They only get to stay with their privilege because they make it look really painful. And we're like, oh, the poor things, they have to do all
So
this stuff all
true.
day, and as they
Yeah,
travel between each palace. So our actual culture is very grassroots, underdog focused. If you have someone coming and boasting and being arrogant in the way that Americans seem to love in a leader, they
yeah,
would immediately lose power. I think I can confidently say Donald Trump wouldn't get elected in a local council here because we
yeah,
can't stand boasters. And that is always a tension, in a sense, between the American culture that used to be exported to us. The church is doing much better now at being more globally minded, but as a kid, where did my rebellion begin? There was always a degree of resentment that we were always being fed these stories about Americans and the American pioneers, and British people would dress up and pull wagons,
oh,
which at the
jeez.
time I thought, this is nothing to do with us and our history. It's not
Yeah,
culturally relevant. Now I know that most of those people were Brits, and I've put two
yeah,
and two
yeah.
together
Like
and I love that
85% of
history.
Utah was
Yeah,
from the
it
United
is
Kingdom.
part of our
Yeah,
story, but I didn't realize as a kid. I just was into it. In primary lessons, in youth lessons, all the examples were the captain of the American football team has asked you to the prom. Everyone knows he wants to shag your brains out tonight, but it's
yeah.
the captain of the football team. Are you going to
Oh,
go with
please.
him?
Yeah,
And that's
yeah,
your moral dilemma. And we're
yeah,
like, if we have a rugby match at school, about 3 parents and a dog turn up to watch it. There isn't a band and marching bands and
yeah,
cheerleaders.
yeah.
So couldn't
So,
relate to
and
this at
that's,
all.
yeah, that's
So
really a good point
yeah.
that you make, because one of the,
Mm,
and let me show another little clip. One of the things
mm,
that they bring out when when now their people are reviewing this Inconvenient Faith
mm.
that's out
Yeah,
there,
yeah.
and it's on YouTube. You can find it if you want to look it up, and that's like 9 episodes.
Mm,
But one of the things they're
mm,
bringing up is that it's still the people that they interview, the stories that they're
mm.
telling are very American. So this is still an
Yeah.
American story. And in
Mm.
a way, it's still a Utah story, because
Very
even like you say, I
mm,
grew up in Illinois in the Midwest. Me and my best friend were the only 2 Mormons in our high school. We went
mm,
to seminary at the church 45 minutes away from our house at 4:30 in the morning so that we could come back and then go to
mm,
school. There was no in-school seminary. I'm sure you
mm.
didn't have that either.
Yeah, no.
And so, when you get to Utah and people just have these, oh, it's part of my high school. And, oh, our Boy Scout, we had 3 Boy Scout troops just in our ward, because our ward takes up, a block and a half, and everybody was a member. And it's just so different. And so, like you're saying, even in the people that they've interviewed for this movie
Mm,
are people in prominence. Like I say, Terrell
mm,
Givens, Patrick Mason, Maxine Hanks,
mm,
John DeLynn, Bill Reel. These are all people that have infamy and name recognition.
mm,
And so when I hear people that are congratulating this, well, this is really good. This is really it's at least it's a foot in the door to help maybe TBMs, true believing Mormons. Maybe they'll be a little bit kinder to people that have left the church, and maybe this will help people that have left the church understand maybe why these people can't change their minds. And they still, I heard, I think it was Maxine Hanks in it. She said, one of the great things is that you can hear people's stories. I'm like, you didn't hear anybody's story. You heard Terrell Givens tell his story, which he's being paid to tell. Let's talk about that. And the sad thing was, as many of them mentioned, most of these interviews were done 6 and 7 years ago, and there's a lot of things
and
that
they've
have
moved
happened.
on since.
Yeah,
Yeah,
a lot of things have happened since the last 6 or
Yeah.
7 years, and so to see
yeah.
Terrell Gibbons and his wife Fiona, and I'm like, well, maybe Fiona was still in the Maxwell Institute before she got kicked out, before she made this thing,
Yeah,
you know. And so
exactly.
the little things like that. But let me show another little clip here.
80% of them
Sure.
have an issue.
It's okay. In fact, it's valuable for religions to ask sacrifice of their people. But over time, sometimes you have to do a realignment and make sure that the sacrifice meets the religion. And some sacrifices become more and more nonsensical. Do you stick with them or do you shift to something else? And that's always a balancing act.
President Joseph F. Smith, as early as 1907, said, "We may not be able to reach it right away, but expect to see the day when we will not have to ask for $1 of donation for any purpose except that which you volunteer to give of your own accord, because we will have tithes sufficient in the storehouse of the Lord to pay everything that is needful for the advancement of the kingdom of God."
The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and its leaders accused of spending years hiding investments from the public. That includes stocks purchased with tithing.
The church was worried about public perception if it got out that it controlled so much wealth.
The value of its investments ballooned past $100 billion.
I think many active Mormons probably don't care. So, but why should they care? I suppose because it's always good to know where your money is being spent.
A major lawsuit against the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints has officially been dismissed. James Huntsman, a former church member, sued the church in 2021, claiming it misused $5 million of his tithing donations to fund commercial projects.
The corporation is clearly a business.
The church said the money came from reserve fund earnings, not direct tithing, and a federal judge sided with the church in 2021.
It didn't come directly from the tithing. It was when we took the tithing and invested it in Microsoft and Apple, you know, and then we took that money and then we invested that money. It's like, I can't go around. I always use this example. I mean, my husband and I had a nonprofit. I would love to have gone around to all the neighbors and say, oh, I'm sorry, but in order for you to live in this neighborhood, you must give me 10% of your income. I will take that. You can write it off as a donation. I will take it, I will invest it, and then in return, we will carry forth the mission of our foundation. But you're commanded by God to give me 10% of your income. You know, I mean, it's like, okay, how stupid. And
I'm not going to tell you how I spend it.
Yes, and I just did a whole thing on the new religion business that came out, a docuseries where he highlighted the Mormon Church, but he also highlighted a lot of other Christian evangelical churches that are taking people's money, but then there's no transparency as where the money goes. It's the dishonesty, the wordplay, the gaslighting in your brain, gymnastics that you have to jump through to try to make sense. And yet there's the people on the other side that are like, well, you know, it wasn't their fault. It was the lawyers, the story that they told.
I know. I think just to your point about that, you know, even the pundits here being in a bubble, even in a sense the ex-Mormon pundits in a bubble, the international church never gets a look in. You know, we're basically ignored. We're very expendable because at the moment we're going up in flames. We are down to 11% active in Britain and falling fast. But your point that it's not even an American thing, it's a Utah thing. What really kind of struck me is I served my mission in the Florida Tallahassee mission, which was an amazing experience, right into the armpits of segregationist deep South, you know, in the Clinton era. Just amazing experience. And I was in Alabama the whole time, in southern Alabama. Wonderful people, completely nuts, off their heads, mad. And I loved every minute. and so kind and hospitable. But when they weren't pointing guns. And but what I loved was the church there was where I'd come from. It was a mixture of branches and stakes. It was the first
Yes.
generation that was getting
Yes.
its act together to have seminary even happening. And it's like I just lived through that in Britain, in Southeast England in the 80s. And it was like kind of going back about 10 years and reliving that. So I got it. I understood. I know where you people are at. I know how difficult it is. You're a tiny minority in a larger pond, with the added difficulty there that everyone else was still going to church, whereas Britain hasn't been doing that for a long time. And again, they were outsiders. It's a completely different experience to what people in Utah are used to.
Yeah.
And I think also, my response, like I'm a fiscal conservative, I'm pro-capitalism, I'm mad keen Brexiter, so I'm seen as quite right wing in lots of ways. I'm also the union rep in my school for
Ah,
teachers, so I dabble with the left as well. I like to be contrarian. There's this every time the amount of money that the general authorities get paid comes up, you just get these people lining up with, well, that's reasonable. They're being capitalism, they should be earning what they're worth and things
yeah.
like that. There's something missing from your brains. In Britain, we are extremely penny pinching. We've been through while America got to boom economically from World War II, we took decades to recover. Our cities have been literally
Yeah.
blown to pieces by the
Yeah.
Luftwaffe. We were in massive debt to everyone. We lost our empire. We owed America a fortune until literally the 1980s. We finished paying off our World War II debts. Americans would come across as arrogant, wealthy, without really deserving it, having no clue about our poverty and what it's like
Yeah.
to live in poverty. And
Yeah.
still well into the 80s, we were not a rich country. Took us a long time to kind of have the Thatcher Revolution and re-embrace capitalism. You just don't get how obscene it is that President Hinckley and others can say that the general authorities are paid a modest stipend,
Yeah.
just enough to live on,
Yeah.
which to us would be 15 grand, maybe, when they get everything else paid for with all
Yeah.
their other expenses,
Yeah.
housing, fuel, car is all that's just expenses.
Yeah.
That's a modest stipend. And it turns out to be 150, 160,000 a year,
Yeah.
which sounds like nothing compared to business moguls and they used to get loads more till Hinckley stopped them being paid as board members as a
Yeah.
perk for the companies the church owned. That's a whole
Yeah.
other story. It's like, no, that is in the top 5%, arguably top 2% of
Yeah.
salaries in Britain and America,
Yeah.
two of the richest nations on earth. You are mega rich if you are earning 160 grand a year,
Yeah.
even in America. And some people
Yeah.
don't seem to get that. I don't know why.
I
Maybe
know.
you're all
And
very,
even
very
they
rich in
also,
Utah. But
yeah, they also
yeah.
forget that these people had jobs.
Mm.
Like they probably
Yes.
have pensions. They
They're
probably had
pensioners. They can live.
401ks. They have social
We were
security. It's not
We
like
were
they're living.
literally
Yeah.
told, no, maybe not from the general authorities, but it was a given, and you'd be taught it on a Sunday
Yeah.
that these guys are living the law of consecration. I was literally taught this, that when they become apostles, they pool all of their resources, whatever investments or anything they've got, with the other apostles, and they kind of live from their own means. I was
Oh,
taught that in
interesting.
youth. Complete nonsense.
Oh,
Couldn't be
yeah.
further from the truth. Obviously, that's what they're doing because they were going on and on about priestcraft. The reason the other churches are
Yeah.
wrong is
Yes.
because they pay their clergy.
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
it was an
Yeah.
obscenity to pay clergy. It was a sure
Yeah.
sign that you're in Lucifer's religion. And then it turns out, oh, these guys are being paid. Oh, and all the mission presidents the same salary.
Yeah. And
And
their kids are going to
and
school free and yeah.
and then you work out how this oligarchy works.
Yep.
Because who's being called as the mission presidents? Their
Yep.
son-in-law. It's a
Yeah.
way to get massive wealth into their
Yeah.
family just in a few years. 3 years as a mission president somewhere.
Yeah.
You're saving them a fortune because the church is paying for the kids' education at nice
Yeah.
schools.
And their
You're paying
housing and
them
yeah.
all the money they get is fun money because they already got their house paid for and the fuel and all the other, the office
Yeah.
elders who leak
Yeah.
the manual of the
Yeah.
expenses that a mission president gets. It's basically giving them 300, 400 grand to play with. And it becomes a system of corruption. You've
And
got a
they
very
didn't
easy
see
way
that.
to inject wealth into your family.
I found out later,
Mm,
but my parents went, my poor dad, and he's
mm,
like you, very conservative, very non-contention, is like, no, I will put up with everything to don't make me do this. And my mom used to get in so many fights because he wouldn't stand up to the neighbors. He was just like, could we just give them some pie and
mm.
call it good? And so they get called, they went on a local mission.
Mm.
I think they went on like 3 missions, but they put in their papers, they got called to New York. And my dad had worked for, and that's when he first came to America, he was working for Cook Travel. He had lived in New York for a while and he knew how expensive it was. I just remember him bowing his head like, I don't want to go there. I don't want to do this, but he did. They went ahead and went. We supplemented, we paid basically for their mission because they couldn't afford New York because they're paying like $1,600 a month plus food and all that kind of stuff. Well, the mission president was
He's being
extremely
paid.
wealthy and was being paid to be the mission president. They had like a
Yeah.
farm in Connecticut and they would take all the people that worked in the temple. They were working in the New York temple and they would take them to their place for Thanksgiving and Christmas, and they were wealthy and they would fly their kids in from Ohio. And like you say, they're very wealthy, but they were getting paid and everybody was being supplemented for that. But my parents are struggling. I mean, my dad would
No,
show a
the rest of
picture.
us, Jesus excoriates the Pharisees for stealing widows'
Yes.
houses and their
Yes.
scam. The idea of the widow's mite being good, it's not. It was a sign of total evil. The
Yeah.
point Jesus was making is no widow should be giving her last pennies to the temple because it means the system's failed. It means her children did not look after her.
See,
They
the
broke the
point was
commandment to
totally
honor your
lost.
father and your mother. But
Yeah.
it's in the later chapters. You keep reading, he gets to it. And he excoriates the Pharisees and the temple Sadducees, rather, for having this financial scam where he says, where they are allowing people to, instead of paying for their parents to support them as their the system for looking after the elderly, if
Yeah.
they give the money to the temple instead of supporting their parents, it's called Corban. It's made sacred and holy. And that's how they're stealing widows' houses, because they're making the widows homeless, because they're giving an excuse. Their kids are buying favor with God at the temple instead of looking after their own parents. And the church literally does this.
Yeah.
You look at the website for opportunities to serve a senior mission, it's costs, and you think, is that their salary? No, you have to pay 20 grand a year to serve
Yeah.
this mission cleaning toilets
Yeah.
somewhere. And it's obscene. You just see the incredible disparity of wealth between the power elite. And another thing, I'm a BYU baby, so spend billions on it. It's worth it. You got me, as I've said before. But for goodness sake, BYU takes 20% of the world's tithing, of all of our tithing,
Yeah.
and it educates a few thousand, mostly white, mostly American, mostly already middle class Mormons to help subsidize them having big families and still having a middle class lifestyle on our tithing, while our
Yeah.
people are starving and they're being guilted for not having young families already at university when it's literally impossible financially unless you've got some rich relatives supplementing you. Again, it's this complete disconnection within their oligarchy bubble that involves sending their kids to BYU and recruiting most of the leadership and the employees of the church from BYU in this self-sufficient, very white feedback loop of wealth and power and influence. We're paying for that.
Now, did
And
you see that's something that as an American,
yeah,
when you're going through school,
mm,
and
yeah.
is there a big push for the youth to go to a university after it's
I
not
think,
called high school?
yeah.
What's it called?
I think, yeah, no, yes. After secondary school, we call high
Secondary
school.
school. Yeah.
Yeah. In our country, around half people go to university, and there's just a general social push, and you're not going to get a well-paid job
And they
unless
have
you
like a
do, unless
community
you're quite an
college
entrepreneur.
or local university.
Um,
Not
no,
everyone's going to Oxford.
no, Yeah, no, that's right. You can do courses at local colleges, but if you're going to do a proper degree, you have to go to one of the universities, and it's going to be expensive. It was free when I went because we have
No.
socialism. I didn't have to pay any fees, and I got a grant which I had to pay back as a student loan. It's about £2,000 a year. And that's, so it
Yeah.
was very manageable then. Since then, the kids now have to pay the fees. It's about 9,000 a year, and they'll be trapped in student loans for a long time,
So just
and
like in
it's all
America.
very much changed. Yeah.
Yeah.
But nothing like as huge as the costs for a quality university in America. It's 3 times as much, so it's ridiculous. But what we've got, again, politically, and this is again another cultural difference that I think a lot of American Mormons are completely oblivious to. Most of the converts in Europe are working class. If the families stay in generationally, a lot of their kids will do well and go to university. They usually now leave the church at that point because they get
Yeah.
an education. Generationally, we get better and we get social mobility. But our politics and our norms are much more grassroots working class than the American norm, which is healthy. When it comes to university, there isn't really that much of a push from the church educationally. Some people go to BYU, but it can then really backfire on the parents because they meet people from other countries there to marry them. I've got
Yes.
some dear friends who invested a lot to kind of expand their house because they had this vision. They had loads of kids and they had this vision of this big, happy home as they become grandparents, and the kids will all be around and they'll come and visit. They're
Yes.
scattered to the four winds because most of them went to BYU, and none of them live within hundreds of miles now. And it's
Yeah.
been tragic for them. We're not building the church locally with this system. Where is
Interesting.
BYU London? Where is BYU Nairobi? Where is BYU Peru?
That's such a good point because
And
that's
they've got the
exactly what
money to do
happened.
it.
Yeah, in the very
Yeah.
beginning, everyone came because they were
Mm,
industrial era. No one had,
mm,
they were promised land, they were promised a home, they were
mm.
promised, and
Yeah.
that's why they were immigrants in the first place, was to better their lives. And now, like you say, they're making, these, oh my gosh, the money that they're spending on temples in just Utah to
Mm,
put a
mm.
university in London where the
Yeah.
people could go to that's real. I mean, that's mind blowing. Why don't they have BYU
Or
England?
give them grants. Why not we have so many struggling
Yeah.
kids who do not succeed in education, and they just a few £1,000s, a small grant that's a fraction of what BYU kids get subsidized, would make a world of difference for them to be able to do better. And it would benefit the church because obviously that we're losing everyone who
Yeah.
gets on the internet, but
Yeah.
or most of them. Um,
Yeah.
but you'd be creating generational wealth that would come back to the church. You'd have people
Yes.
with stable middle class jobs who are available on the weekends to run church. There's no
Yes.
big thinking here. It's just this patronizing, oh, we are people out there of the mission field. And another example of this complete financial disparity and the obscenity of it is you could say quite an extreme example, but it's my life.
Yeah.
My ward for 15 years or so was Welling Ward in South London. Technically, it covered the Woolwich branch area that when Brigham Young and the apostles came and set up the church in Britain, they divided London into four, and one of them was Welling Ward's patch. We were there, Welling Ward was there before Mormons went to Utah. Welling Ward did not have a chapel. It was meeting in schools, it was meeting in dingy community halls, constantly mobile, living out of a cupboard. Amazing congregation. It got up to 150 on a Sunday, which is huge for us.
Wow. Yeah.
15 different nationalities, missionaries baptizing constantly. At one point, when I was ward mission leader, I heard on the grapevine, and it wasn't because of me, we had 6 missionaries. We were the top baptizing mission ward in Europe. Over and over again, we found land to build a ward, to build a chapel, and everyone prayed, and we did the fasting and the pleading with God, and somehow we just never got it, or they got it and then they screwed it up, or over and over again for decade after decade. And then it turned out the church was intentionally underbidding in all they never put in a realistic bid for what it would have taken to buy land for Welling to have a decent chapel. And when one of our state presidency members found out about that, that was kind of a real shelf breaker for him. He was
Wow.
horrified, and he and his family have left the church. This year, you couldn't make this up. one of the ward members finally kind of had enough, decided to just go to war with the church's planning department. And the best they could do was they bought an old working man's club in a really crappy corner of South London in Plumstead, bless them, with 3 parking spaces. And they've bought it and they've converted it into a chapel. But for fire regs, it has an upper limit of 70 people. So they've chopped off the left-hand half of this ward and giving it to Catford Ward. They've chopped off the right-hand half of the quarter or whatever of it and given it to my ward, now Gravesend. And literally, they're in this building that if they grow, they will have to send people away because they can't have more than 70 people in the room at sacrament meeting.
70, and do you even have 70 people?
Insane. I don't know. I mean,
Yeah.
there's not going to be many left. They've obviously chopped it down to fit.
Gosh.
In this church with hundreds of billions, and here's the
And like I
kicker.
say, and everybody's so, and President Nelson, the reason why we're building temples is because we want it to be closer to people to take their covenants. How about go to church every Sunday?
Guess what they did spend the money on, though?
Oh
A
my
few years
gosh.
ago, 103 million pounds to buy Alder Castle, which is a very posh high-end office block in London, as a Enzyme Peak commercial investment. 103 million pounds. It looks like a temple inside. 20 minutes drive from Welling. And then recently they spent 70 to 100 million dollars on an Amazon warehouse in
Yes,
Wembley in
yes.
London. Literally, Welling,
Yeah.
potentially one of the biggest wards in the country,
And the oldest
peanuts, and they've
established,
chopped it up.
Yeah, I'm reading
Yeah.
John Turner's book right now. He's talking about Zion's camp, and he's talking about how Joseph Smith's instructions to the people in Missouri was buy up everything you can. If they're not going to let us legally stay here, we will own the world, he said. And that's how we will take over, by owning the world. And I thought, well, that was one prediction that you gave that is coming true,
It did
because
come.
that's exactly what's happening. They are literally buying up as much
You can
property.
buy anything in this world with money, Rene.
Yes. Gee, where have I heard that
Where did I hear
before?
that?
All right, let me show you. Now, this is a podcast
Yeah.
that was kind of talking about how great this new Inconvenient Faith is. And so let me show you this.
It's been years since they were filmed, longer than I thought it had been. I said to Jana, "Oh, geez, that's 4 years ago," and she said, "Nope, 6." I went, "Huh." So I really want to hear from them. I'll just give you a brief thumbnail sketch. So I sort of launched into this weird world when I wrote my reply to the CES letter. And at one point, somebody said, "I'd really love to see you go toe to toe with Bill Reel." And I said, "I don't want to go toe to toe with anybody, but I'm happy to talk to anybody." And so I immediately got a phone call from Bill Reel, and we did 14 hours of podcast discussions, which really sort of shifted my approach, because after I had done the CES letter reply, I would get all these emails like from missionaries, from people saying, "Thank you, you helped me sort of save my faith." And after I went on Bill Reel and later on John DeLynn, I would get messages from people who had left the church and said, "You didn't convince me to come back to church. You did, but what you did was help me better understand my family and friends who are still in." I realized there that there's this huge community sort of on the borders of the church.
That's the story that they're telling, is this new Inconvenient Faith is for people that are on the fence. They,
Yeah.
and this is supposedly going to bring everybody together, and everybody's going to sing kumbaya and love one another.
I come to different conclusions to them, but that's a human being who's wrestling with this, who's thoughtful, who's reasonable, who's trying to follow the Spirit as best that they can, try to follow their intuition, their reason, their conscience. I think there's a lot we saw here about conscience and what it means to wrestle with what it means to follow your conscience in a very complicated world. If people can just pause on their position statements for a moment and focus on the people in front of them, both as they're watching the film, but of course, as we go out into the world, that helps reduce some of this polarization, some of the fracture that we see in so many areas of our life.
And see, here's the thing. I don't think it does. Because exactly what you said, Peter, it's like they're talking about the polarity of you're either a member, you're either in or you're out. And the problem is, it's not, I don't listen to Russell Nelson and go, well, he's just an old man and he doesn't really know. I take him for saying, I I got a revelation last night, and Wendy had to get up and leave the bedroom because
Yes.
I had to write this down with my little
Yeah.
pen that someone gave me that lit up in the night. These words I'm going to tell you are directly from God. That's what I hear. And then I hear the
Yeah.
next conference, he goes, we shouldn't say anything bad about anybody. He turned into loving grandpa. And the next thing you know was
Yeah.
the best talk Russell Nelson's ever given. It was so kind and wonderful. And the next,
Yeah.
6 months later, don't listen to anybody that isn't a member. They don't know what and I'm like,
Yeah.
okay.
And this is why I frame it as a civil war. It's constant contradictions. And it drives people crazy. And I think it gradually makes people think, well, I can't make sense of all these contradictions. It must make sense to them. I'll just trust them. And that's the game they're playing. They want people to be so confused that they'll just believe them while they're clearly having their divisive infighting. I mean, as people have been mentioning some podcasts recently, you need to watch General Conference not as them talking to us, but as the different factions of apostles talking to each other. And they teach completely different religions. You've got Patrick Kieran and Uchtdorf and the French guy Carrier, who's adorable, just teaching pure grace-based Christianity. It's like listening to evangelicals. I never thought I'd hear this from a Mormon pulpit. And then the complete opposite, they have it's and all you have to do is kind of open your eyes to this. A house divided against itself will fall. They need to pick a side. And I'm advocating they pick Jesus, not the
There's a
Pharisees.
thought.
Like, you should know better.
Yeah.
It's just, why is it so hard? But in the defense of this program, it was originally envisioned as a 2-hour documentary in which people would have had much more time to kind of explain themselves and maybe tell their backstories and so on. I think Jim Bennett and others have done an excellent job editing from what they had. The second time I listened through, I was like, wow, for something short, you have packed a lot in. They bring up nearly all of the talking points. I know people are frustrated that they've given more airtime to the nuanced excuses and the reasons it can be okay, and they always get the last word in each episode. So it definitely has a narrative bias. But the way I view it is, what an amazing resource to begin a conversation, because every soundbite there, we know there are 20 amazing podcast episodes picking that apart and bringing people's life experiences and all that. So I do think it's completely unfair and unreasonable to expect them to have been all things to all men. I think as a taster of that worldview and the issues that are being discussed in the nuanced and ExMormon world, it was brilliant. And in a sense, they represented the TBM perspective by having the general authorities quoted. And so I was whooping for joy that they found this really obscure quote of Packer actually repeating the Joseph F. Smith promise that we'd stop tithing when we didn't need it anymore. It took me ages to find that and track it down. I think I've used it. What it comes from is, I think in the early 80s or something, church shifted its financial approach from doing loads of extra fundraising for everything, where you will pay extra for your chapel, you'll pay extra for youth activities. They actually wanted to reduce the financial burden. So they had this special broadcast. It wasn't in general conference, but it was like a conference session in which they explained, all we want now is tithing and fast offering. We're not going to let you do extra fundraising. It needs to be fair. In a way, that was a good thing. And that's where he said that quote, which is just delicious, having it come from his mouth of all people. But then they didn't keep that promise. But it reminds us, they knew it. They knew that this apostle had promised. And isn't it interesting that it was Boyd K. Packer, apparently, in all the insider gossip we hear, that when he asked as president of the Quorum of 12 how much money is in Ensign Peak, they wouldn't tell him. And this was one of the bombshell revelations from the whistleblower, because the financial committee that runs the finances of the church is the first presidency in the presiding bishopric, but not the president of the Quorum of 12 Apostles. They don't get a look in. So Packer was literally, they were even keeping what's in Ensign Peak a secret from the other apostles. None of them knew how much money was in that thing, which shows their shame. They know it's appalling and inexcusable. So I was so pleased that they got that clip in. But I think part of the point you're making, though, which I totally agree with, is I'm thinking, can I show this to my TBM family members? none of them would recognize any of the versions of Mormonism on offer there, except the quotes from the GAs, and they'd say
Yeah.
those were out of context.
Yes.
And
Good
this is your
point.
frustration and our frustration,
Yeah.
that the Givens, all these apologists, Patrick Mason, the Faith Matters crowd, they've all made up their own version of Mormonism, but it is absolutely not the general authorities version. It is not the first presidency's version of this religion. And I'm kind of amazed because Patrick Mason, one of the juiciest moments from his wonderful 3 sort of sessions with John Dehlin on Mormon stories,
Yeah.
he basically said these people should just get on with managing the church as a corporation and
Yeah.
running it, but they shouldn't touch theology
Yes.
and doctrine. Leave that to us. We're the
Yeah.
expert theologians. We're the historians. We should decide the church's doctrines, and they should
Yep.
just get on with managing the money. That was apostasy right there. I mean,
That's why
literally,
he was
the
pulled,
whole
right?
literally the whole point of our religion is the first presidency and the apostles are the only people authorized to decide what doctrine is and what our
Yeah.
theology is. No
Yeah.
one else has the right. And Patrick has so normalized. And when people like him say something like that, that is so ridiculous and impossible, you realize they have got so used to talking to each other in the intellectual bubble in Utah, between him and the Givens and all the other people in that world. They've understood the problems like we have, and they've worked out the solutions like we have. The line they're trying to take is the church is kind of already there, whereas we know perfectly well it is nowhere near there.
Yeah.
And if those apostles were actually listening to you, Patrick, you'd have been excommunicated the next day, because
Yeah.
you basically said, you bore your testimony on to the internet that the apostles are crap at prophecy, they don't know history, and they're
Yep.
rubbish at theology and doctrine. They
Yeah.
literally are not equipped to do that.
Yeah.
Which is, and I got X'd for saying that sort of thing. But
And
they're in
you're
their
exactly
bubble and
right.
they think they're safe, and it
Yeah.
makes them think it's all right. They'll tell these stories how lovely these general authorities are. They're so nice. We have these private conversations with them, and
Yeah.
they're very understanding. It's like they're playing you, mate. They
Yeah.
are playing you. They're glad that you're a lightning rod for the people on the fringes,
Yeah.
but they can't do it. Yeah, sorry.
And I think you're
Maybe.
no, I think you're absolutely right. It's when I first saw it, I thought, well, I'm going to get my husband to watch this because he's a true believing Mormon. This will be a way for him to hear some of the historical facts that when I say them to him, he thinks all I've done is listen to John Dehlin and I'm just repeating his
Yeah, yeah,
stuff. He
yeah.
doesn't think that I ever had a thought of my own,
Negativity.
Yeah. And so I think that, but then I think, yeah, but then what happens is because he's already got his bias, he's going to listen to Patrick Mason, where Patrick Mason says, Joseph Smith sinned, polygamy was a sin, polygamy was wrong, probably should have never done it, but he was a prophet and he was fallible. And that's what he's going to hear. And I'm going to hear, well, I don't forgive, adulterous pedophiles. That's not my first inclination, but kind of, and one of the clips I had, it was his character is important and you have to take his character under consideration. And so I don't know if it's going to do what the intention is, if it's going to really bring people together, maybe for some, but for those of us that were raised in the 60s where everything was black and white, and we had Gordon B. Hinckley was my prophet. I mean, he married us in the temple. And when he says the Book of Mormon is either true or it's not, Joseph Smith was either a prophet or he's not. That was the black and white thinking that I was raised with. So I'm like, and he's not. The end, So I agree with you. Very well done. You couldn't, and I love it when John said, let them talk, and you'd have this 25,000 hour documentary, which you
Yes, of
cannot
course.
have.
Yeah, yeah.
And 9
No.
episodes is as much as people can take. So it will prove out to make a difference. We'll see at conference in a couple of weeks, right?
I think, one of its great strengths is it's one of the, which they have celebrated in these panels reviewing it, is it's one of the rare moments where you do get quite a diverse range of people in the same room together on the same project.
Yeah.
And it feels almost like another stab at the thing Patrick screwed up. I might be going off him now, because John Dehlin and John Reese and Patrick Mason, we're going to have this weekly show where you have
Yeah.
the faithful insider and the
Yeah.
arch nemesis and the sort of neutral journalist on the
Yeah.
fringes every week discuss things and just model being in the same room and talking as civilized people to each
Yeah.
other, which in the nuanced and post-Mormon space we're all used to. We've
Yeah.
thrown off the shackles. We can just have normal intellectual, no holds barred debates and conversations with each other without having to constantly worry that someone watching this might lose their testimony. But the reaction from TBMs to Patrick was so immediate and so vicious that he was even
Yeah.
in a room with the Satan John Dehlin,
Yeah.
means he chickened out almost immediately.
Yeah.
And I was so disappointed in that. I'm like, so this is why they're not the solution, these people. They're a
Yeah.
sticking plaster on a gaping hemorrhage. You need insiders, you need apologists, you need people on the fringes, and you need sort of the aggressive warriors
Yeah.
to make change happen in an institution. And it takes everyone playing their parts. So I appreciate them trying to walk this line. But when they then become the excuse and the patronizing voice saying, oh, it's much easier to stay in than you think it is, or to imply there are easy solutions to all these things, or to show empathy that is difficult, isn't it? But as you know, quite rightly, people have excoriated the quote where they have the little soundbite from Terrell Givens where he's saying, you know, he was marrying underage girls and you should be concerned about that.
Yes.
But he's
Yes.
still a prophet. But as you say, who in our ward would do charity frauds? Who would steal millions of people from the poor? None of them. They wouldn't dream of taking
Yeah.
money from the poor,
Yeah.
you know, off their own bat. They obviously do it on behalf of the church,
Yeah.
but they wouldn't. And then spending it on wealth and shares. That's charity fraud. Who would lie? I don't know anyone in my ward who would be comfortable lying on anything like the scale that the apostles do all the time and the church institutions have, and the mealy-mouthed, lawyerly ways they word their proclamations and everything to keep plausible deniability going. Our generation grew up with our church is better. It was wonderful. It was so easy to feel smug and superior to all the other churches. The
Yeah.
other churches are corrupt because they lie and they distort history and they pay their clergy and
Yes.
blah. And now it's like we're meant to, and we had the whole ethos of where much is given, much is required.
Yeah.
The higher up the ranks, the more holy you should be. And that was completely expected. Now it's the higher up the ranks, the more we'll cut them slack. If you're a little teenage 14-year-old boy looking at a catalogue and having sexual thoughts, we will put you through hell. We will finally police your behavior. But if the founder of the religion was raping teenagers, oh, that's fine. He's just being fallible and human. We
Yeah.
have to forgive him a lot because he's a
Yeah.
prophet and it's difficult. That's a complete moral inversion of
Yeah.
the standards we were led to expect and that the church expects of grassroots members, the intensity with which we're policed. But the more you go up now, and they've taught everyone to think this, instead of where much is given, much is required, the more status they have, the less will require, the bigger
Yeah.
the excuses will make.
Yeah.
The huger the crimes and sins we will just immediately make excuses for, rather than
Yeah.
sitting with the fact
Which
that we
unfortunately is,
wouldn't let our own
yeah.
children do this stuff. Yeah.
Exactly. And I think you're right, Peter. And I think that's unfortunately where we're going to have to end. But I think you're right. I mean, when I watched it, I didn't have a gray area. I was still black or white. It didn't change my mind. And I think it's going to do the
Yeah.
same thing on the opposite. My husband's going to watch it. He's
Mm.
going to listen to
Mm.
Patrick Mason. He's going to listen to Terrell Givens. He's going to go, yeah, that's how we should think.
It's all
So
okay. It's
it's
soothed.
all okay.
Yeah.
So I don't know. A lot of his experience. My husband's a successful business white guy who's held
Mm.
lots of positions of authority, so the church works well for him. And
Absolutely. Yeah. Mm.
people still call him bishop. So nobody
Mm.
calls me president, even though I was the president of the Young Women's Stake. So there's the
Yeah.
difference. And there's so many other different areas. But
Yeah.
this has
Yeah.
been, and I want where they can still, if they were to Google Mormon Civil War,
Yes. Yeah,
Wars.
so it's the podcast. So in all the podcast streaming services, Mormon Civil War, it's there, all the
Okay,
episodes.
not in YouTube.
And
There's not a visual. It's
and
podcasts.
also visual.
Oh,
So I
okay.
also have a YouTube channel, so it's all there. The episodes were audio up to about half of the ones that there. Then John DeLynn convinced me to get a camera and go film me. So
Okay.
lots of visuals on the screen, all the documents, lots of clips of general authorities, all the evidence of everything I'm talking about is on the
Yeah.
screen. So
Yeah.
absolutely, check out Mormon Civil War YouTube channel. I'm still working on episodes; they still go out, and there's lots there. There's a whole archive to have fun with.
Okay.
Yep.
It's absolutely, it was so wonderful to listen to because I am very much someone that needs a beginning, a middle, and an end, and so going through history with your podcast was so beneficial and I learned so much. And that's when I was first introduced to you. And then of course I loved it when you guys were doing the whole British Brit Vengers, and that was so fun.
Yes.
And I was sorry to see what's his name? Who's the guy that
Oh, Priesthood Dispatches.
Yes, Priesthood
Yeah.
Dispatch. I was sorry
Yeah.
to see him leave, and then
Yeah.
everyone's kind of gone their
He's
way.
doing
But
well.
yeah,
Yeah.
I'm so glad to hear that. So anyway,
Yeah.
thank you for joining me for Jolly Old
A
England.
pleasure.
You have
Oh,
to go to bed, and I have
anytime.
to go to a Labor Day activity here in Utah. So my husband
Have
found
fun.
something. It's called the Onion Fest. We're going to the Onion Fest, and I said,
Oh,
"Are we going to be eating onions?" And I said, "Oh,
this
if
sounds
they're
very
deep fried."
agricultural.
There you go. Absolutely. All right. Thanks for joining me today, Peter.
Take
Bye-bye.
care. My
Or
pleasure.
I
Thank
should
you.
say
Bye.
cheerio, right? Cheerio.
Cheerio. Toodle pip.
There you go. Oh my gosh, that was so fun. You have to look up the Mormon Civil Wars. He really is so brilliant. And everything is done, like I said, chronologically. It's easy to follow. It's very informative. And the great thing about the podcast is, even though you can still listen to a YouTube, you don't have to be watching it. You're kind of drawn to want to watch it. So when it is done in a podcast form, it really allows you to turn off that part of your brain and go for a walk, a drive, if you have a long drive, and you can listen to it without really being too distracted. So that's a great thing about that. But anyway, he's just so fun to listen to. If you watch some of the old Brit Vengers, Nemo was on there, and Priesthood Dispatch, and Jane Christie with her 21st Century Saints. It was so fun, and they've all had to live an actual life, unlike some of us that just do nothing but this and go to onion festivals on Labor Day. So anyway, thanks for joining me today. Don't forget to subscribe and push the notification button, just so that you're notified when something's coming up. I try to release these at least 3 times a week, but things like Labor Day happen, Christmas, Thanksgiving, other holidays happen. People go on vacation. That's called life. And that was one of the other beautiful things about having Peter on the show today is they don't do Labor Day in England. So he wasn't celebrating a holiday. And so he was so generous to come on the podcast. But thanks for joining me today. And we will see you again on She Became Visible. Bye-bye.